Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the towering shadows of the medieval world. You stand before a castle, high stone walls wrapped in ivy, archers glinting like ghosts on the battlements, and the distant sound of iron gates groaning in the wind. It looks majestic, solid, eternal. But looks lie, because once you walk through that gate, it becomes painfully clear. This place doesn't want you here. In fact, it was designed to kill you, slowly, cleverly, and often with a grin. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach slowly, boots sinking into the muddy path, a dense fog curling at your knees. The drawbridge ahead creaks open like an old jaw. The air is damp with moss and the faint scent of horse dung. You duck inside, and just like that, the walls close behind you. There's no welcoming committee, no flickering torchlit corridor leading you to some noble lord's banquet. Instead, the first thing you feel is a chill, not the kind that brushes your skin, the kind that settles in your bones, the kind that whispers, you might not be walking back out of here. Castles weren't built for luxury. They were built to outlast. Outlast enemies, outlast weather, outlast time itself. But in the process, they turned against their own inhabitants. You glance up and see the sky vanishing behind thick parapets. This place is a maze of traps disguised as rooms, and rooms disguised as safety. A fortress, yes, but also a coffin with better ventilation. You're ushered through a narrow passage by a man with fewer teeth than toes. He mutters something about rats in the pantry and nods toward the dungeon. That's not hyperbole. That's your bed for the night. The walls drip with condensation. The straw bedding has more fleas than fibers. And the iron door that clangs shut behind you? It locks from the outside. Sleep tight. Historians still argue whether castles were ever truly comfortable for anyone other than their highest-ranking lords, but the evidence isn't on comfort's side. Take the Tower of London, majestic and iconic now, but in its day, it was a grim place of confinement, its chill stone echoing with the sound of chains and tortured prayers. Let's say you were lucky, someone important, maybe even noble-born. Even then, your odds aren't great. Remember, this isn't a hotel. This is a military base where the enemies are outside and sometimes inside the walls. Even your private chamber has a convenient hatch built into the ceiling. For light? For air? No. For guards to drop hot sand or molten lead if things got rowdy. One little-known detail that makes castles truly nightmarish? Sound carries. You can hear the echo of every scream, every dropped bucket, every whispered betrayal through the stone corridors. It's like the place wants you to know what's happening in every awful room except your own. And don't even try to navigate it alone. The layout isn't meant for convenience. It's a trap. Passages spiral into nowhere. Staircases narrow just enough to trap a man in armor. Doors are deliberately offset to confuse attackers and visitors. In the dark, the castle is alive with malicious intent. As you explore, or rather survive your first few hours inside, you start noticing things. The walls are incredibly thick. Yes, but the windows? Mere slits. There's no sunlight, only gloom. Fires burn, but the smoke clings to everything. Your eyes sting, your throat scratches, and you start to understand. Castles may be built to withstand sieges, but they're also perfectly suited for slowly roasting their occupants from the inside. Your dungeon room might actually be safer than the kitchens, or the stairs, or the feasting hall. But we'll get to those later. For now, try to sleep. Listen to the rats scurrying above the rafters. Try not to think about the fact that if someone really wanted to get rid of you, all they'd have to do is leave your door unlocked one night and whisper the right words in the right ears. You shiver. Welcome to your first night in a medieval castle. You probably won't survive the second. You're woken not by birdsong, but by the sharp slap of cold water dripping onto your forehead from a leak in the ceiling. You sit up, or try to. Your spine protests the stone floor beneath your straw mat, and your skin itches with 1,000 tiny bites. Outside your chamber, iron boots echo like war drums in the hallway. Someone's coming. You shuffle into the passageway and follow the guards up a winding corridor. The light shifts as you emerge into a small, Virchow-enclosed courtyard. At first glance, it looks peaceful. Ivy clings to the walls and a few pigeons coo from a ledge, but then you look up, higher, toward the murder holes. Yes, murder holes. That's not a joke. Those perfectly square little openings above the archway you just walked under, they're not for sunlight. They're for death. You squint, one wrong siege, and those holes come to life. Boiling oil, scalding sand, arrows, bricks, even bags of lime meant to burn the eyes right out of your skull. Medieval defenders had a rather creative approach to pest control, especially when the pests were other humans. The French called them meurtrières, which translates literally to murderers, which, frankly, is very on brand. Historians still argue whether burning pitch or boiling water was the more common weapon, but either way, it was dumped with delight. Defenders had no problem sacrificing a few barrels of oil if it meant turning your bones into charcoal. The best part? You'd never see it coming. Imagine pushing through a gate in the chaos of battle, already dodging arrows, only to be rewarded with a rain of agony from above. And that's if you make it that far. You rub your arms and glance around nervously. No one's dumping anything today, but the sense of looming threat lingers. These features aren't just military, there's a psychological edge too. The castle wants you to feel vulnerable, small, like prey. And you haven't even stepped into the main keep yet. Let's detour through a little side corridor, a narrow slit of a hallway lined with torch sconces and pitted with ancient cracks. You notice the ceiling bulges in some places. At one point, a patch of stone looks suspiciously like it was rebuilt recently. That's not a design choice. That's where they dropped rocks on someone. See, murder holes weren't just confined to the front gates. Castles had them all over, above narrow corridors, stairwells, even indoor courtyards. Why? Because attackers don't always come through the front door, and because paranoia was, arguably, a key part of medieval architecture. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Scottish castles, murder holes were used not only in defense, but also for bizarre rituals. One preserved account describes a feast where roasted boar was dramatically dropped through a hole above the dining hall table, skewered on a massive spit like a medieval hibachi trick. Nothing like a flying pig to liven up your turnip stew. But usually, it wasn't food falling from the ceiling. You keep walking, flinching slightly under every stone aperture above. The worst thing about murder holes isn't their deadliness, it's their silence. You never hear them until it's too late. They're like the medieval version of passive-aggressive doom. Just always watching, always waiting. And that medieval soldier up there? He's got time, he's got aim, and he's got no intention of letting you leave in one piece. The real horror is imagining you're on the other side, trying to attack this place. You'd charge in with a shield, maybe a ram, full of adrenaline and desperation, and within seconds, you're slipping in a mix of mud, Vershaft blood, and burning pitch. The smell alone would peel the skin off your dignity. Still feel like storming the castle? You glance at one last murder hole and step cautiously beneath it, half expecting a rock to drop, as if gravity itself had a grudge. The wind whistles softly above you. For now, you're safe. But the castle remembers, and it wants you to know that safety here is never guaranteed. You press onward, deeper into the labyrinth of stone and silence. And as the halls darken again, you realize something odd. The most dangerous parts of this place aren't the weapons. It's the architecture. You keep moving, led now by the vague hope of sunlight or warmth, anything to shake the damp that's permanently settled into your bones. But then you see it. A narrow staircase spiraling up into darkness. The steps are steep, uneven, and worn to a treacherous polish by centuries of armored boots. You hesitate. Too late. You're ushered upward with a grunt and a wave. The stone stairwell coils like a snake, tight and tighter still. There's no railing. The walls press in. The step width barely accommodates your boot. If you trip, you fall, and not into the comforting embrace of a plush carpet. You'll hit jagged edges all the way down, like a human pinball with cracked ribs. And this is no accident. Spiral staircases in medieval castles were purposefully designed to be deadly, especially if you were climbing them with ill intent. Most castle staircases spiral clockwise. Why? Because your right hand, the sword hand, for most, would be jammed against the inner wall, unable to swing freely. The defender, descending from above, had the advantage. More room to strike. Better footing, gravity on their side. You're just an awkward target wheezing in full chainmail, dodging swords and stairs at the same time. Historians still argue whether all spiral staircases were truly designed for defense or if some simply followed space constraints. But in battle, intent matters less than effect. And the effect is brutal. You trip once, you're done. You lose balance in armor, you're toast. And there's no do-over, just gravity and regret. As you ascend, you find yourself placing your foot just a little more carefully, your hand brushing the clammy wall, half expecting a sword tip to flash down from above. The stone is slick in places, years of grime and human touch. One step even dips slightly in the middle, worn down from centuries of use. You wouldn't notice unless you were looking, or falling. At one bend, you come to a sudden stop. The stair widens, a small alcove. You step in, heart thudding. What is this? It's called a guard's niche, a little murder cubby, basically. It lets a defender hide in the curve of the stairs and stab you in the spleen as you climb past. Charming, right? You lean out and peer up the stairwell, imagining some surly man-at-arms crouched just above you, dagger poised, breath held. It's like a scene from a horror movie, except it's very, very real. No dragons here, just practical man menace. Then there's the lighting, or lack of it. No windows, maybe a slit of torchlight here and there, just enough to catch the glint of a helmet or the blood on your hand. But mostly, it's dark, disorienting. If you're invading, it's a tomb. If you live here, it's still kind of a tomb, just one with taxes. Let's pause for one of those weird little tidbits that always makes history even stranger. Some castles actually incorporated winding staircases that deliberately changed direction midway. Why? To throw off invaders who thought they had the layout memorized. Surprise! Now you're falling off the left side instead of the right. You have to almost admire the pettiness. You finally reach the top, lungs burning, thighs screaming, and step onto a parapet. The wind slaps your face immediately, cold and merciless. The view might be beautiful, rolling hills, distant forests, but you can't enjoy it. You're too busy wondering how the hell you're going to get back down those stairs without dying. You remember how it looked from the ground, majestic, even romantic. And now, it's a death funnel. Every step a trap, every shadow a threat. Even the very layout of the place wants you to fail. You rest your hand on the battlement, feeling its roughness beneath your fingertips. The stone is weathered, ancient, indifferent. So many before you have walked these same stairs. Knights, servants, invaders, ghosts. Most of them didn't leave smiling. From here, you can see more spiral towers, dozens, twisting like bony fingers into the sky. Each one promises the same experience: disorientation, danger, and a quiet architectural sneer in your direction. And the joke? You haven't even reached the real traps yet. Because this castle, like all the others, doesn't just punish outsiders, it punishes everyone. You descend carefully, knees stiff from the climb, boots scraping over the same treacherous spiral stairs. One slip and you'd tumble down like a sack of beets. But somehow, you reach the bottom without breaking your neck. Success, by medieval standards. The guard ahead grunts and gestures toward a side hallway. It's low-ceilinged, cool, and smells faintly of rot. You round a corner and stop dead. A moat. Not just any moat. This one's wide, brownish-green, and bubbling in places that water absolutely shouldn't bubble. Dragon breath? No, just gas from decomposing filth. From a distance, moats look noble, regal, the sort of thing a Disney princess might gaze across while singing about freedom. But this is less castle of dreams and more toilet of nightmares. You lean over the edge of the stone wall, flies buzz. A duck swims through the sludge, looking vaguely ashamed of itself. And you finally understand the truth. Moats weren't just water obstacles. They were disease traps. Originally, moats weren't even filled with water at all. Just dry trenches meant to slow down enemies and break siege towers. But when water was added, everything changed. And not in a good way. Historians still argue whether moats were ever intended as permanent features, or if many were simply glorified drainage ditches gone wild. What's not debated is what they became: fetid breeding grounds for disease. See, castles had another delightful architectural feature: garderobes. That's a fancy word for toilets that hang off the walls, waste dropped straight down into the moat in many cases. So every time someone upstairs relieved themselves, the moat got a little fuller. Now imagine a siege. No fresh water, no proper waste disposal, and a moat that doubles as the castle's latrine, garbage bin, and dead animal repository. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You wonder how people didn't die just from standing near the thing. Well, they did. Dysentery was a frequent killer. Typhoid, too. In fact, some moats were so toxic they inadvertently became chemical weapons. During sieges, defenders would sometimes toss enemy corpses or plague victims into the moat to discourage attackers from getting too close. That's not warfare. That's biohazard warfare, centuries before Geneva Conventions. You shuffle back from the edge, a little queasy. The guard chuckles. "Don't fall in," he mutters, then adds, "They never fish you out." Charming. Here's a quirky little side note for your mental scrapbook. In some cases, moats weren't just for defense. They were stocked with fish, carp, eels, sometimes even pike. Not because castle lords loved angling on a Sunday, but because food security was a real concern during sieges. That's right, your disease pit could also be your emergency sushi bar. Bon appetit. You cross the bridge quickly, nostrils flared to block the stench. The wooden planks creak under your weight, and every step feels a little too hollow for comfort. The drawbridge has been lowered today, but that massive wheel mechanism nearby? Yeah, it can pull the bridge up in seconds, cutting off anyone in mid-crossing. You imagine being one of those anyones. Charging toward the castle as hot oil rains down, and just as you're about to leap to safety, clunk. Up goes the bridge. You tumble backward into the moat. If you're lucky, you die fast. If not, you tread water in a slurry of sewage, surrounded by the bloated corpses of the last unlucky souls. Maybe you'd prefer to die on the bridge. Even the drawbridge chains groan ominously. Thick iron worn from centuries of use and likely to snap at the worst possible moment. Maintenance? Not exactly a medieval strong suit. But let's say you survive all that. You cross the moat. The bridge doesn't fall. No one drops boiling soup on your head. You wipe your boots on a tuffet of moss and sigh in relief. And yet the castle's worst trap still lies ahead, because you've just entered a place that doesn't just defend against invaders, it devours its own. You barely have time to shake the moat stench from your tunic before you're herded into a shadowy gatehouse where the real menace starts. Not with swords, but with silence. The tunnel narrows, the light dims, the air thickens with the scent of metal and mildew. Then you see it, a tall, jagged, iron-toothed gate suspended above your head. That, my friend, is the portcullis, a medieval version of a guillotine with boundary issues. At rest, it hangs innocently above the entryway. But that's only to lull you into a false sense of architectural safety. If it drops, and it can drop, it'll slam down in less than a second, crushing anything beneath with the casual cruelty of a stone colossus stepping on a beetle. Portcullises weren't just gates. They were layered traps, usually one of several in a tunnel, deliberately designed to confuse and compress attackers. You might get through one, only to be stuck between two, like a particularly doomed sandwich filling. Historians still argue whether portcullises were more effective as psychological deterrents or physical defenses. But trust your neck on this. They weren't just for show. You stop walking, eyes fixed on the grooves carved into the stone walls beside you. That's where the iron gate slides. And judging by the dents and dried rust along the edges, it's been sliding over more than just air. Bits of helmet, finger bones, maybe the occasional limb. Sometimes defenders waited to drop it, let a few enemies funnel through, then slam the gate shut behind them. Now those few unlucky souls are trapped, surrounded, and flailing inside the gate tunnel while arrows rain from hidden slots in the walls. You're not just caught, you're target practice. The portcullis wasn't a one-trick pony either. Some castles had multiple gates in a row, creating a sequence of death that worked like a twisted car wash of doom. Portcullis 1 drops behind you. Portcullis 2 slams down ahead. And in between, fire, rocks, maybe boiling urine. Yes, really, and definitely no escape. There's a fringe theory, occasionally floated by castle enthusiasts, that some portcullises were intentionally sharpened to maximize carnage. While that's still debated, a few museum examples show rather suspiciously blade-like edges. Whether functional or just an extra psychological twist, it's enough to make your scalp inch away from your collar. You inch forward, head tilted upward. The portcullis above this gatehouse is rusted, its massive weight suspended by a system of ropes and counterweights far out of sight. One bad pulley, one inattentive guard, and it drops like divine judgment. You wonder, do castle designers want accidents? Short answer, sometimes. Medieval safety regulations didn't exist. Most castles were built with function over forgiveness, and the gatehouse, defensive heart of the structure, was engineered specifically to give zero mercy. Even if you were a friendly visitor, the threat lingered. One wrong move, one whisper of rebellion, and suddenly you're testing the tensile strength of medieval iron with your face. Let's not forget the people manning these death machines: castle guards. Poorly paid, badly fed, and often bored. The idea of cranking the winch to trap someone just because they looked at the Lord's daughter the wrong way? Entirely plausible. There's even a recorded case from a Welsh fortress where a wine-drunk porter dropped the portcullis too early during a wedding procession, crushing part of the bride's family wagon. Nobody was surprised, except maybe the horse. And here's the strange part. Portcullises weren't just on the outside. Some castles hid them deeper inside, separating courtyards or even sealing off great halls. That means you could live in a castle for months, even years, never noticing the gate hidden just above the corridor where you walk daily, until someone drops it. You're standing there now, 1 foot over the groove in the floor, one deep breath echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The sunlight from the courtyard beyond seems 1,000 miles away. The guard behind you clears his throat and motions you onward. You step out of the gate tunnel, heart racing. It doesn't fall. Not today. But the tension lingers like a sour taste. It's not just what you see, it's what the castle could do to you at any moment. You were never safe, even when things were quiet. Maybe especially when things were quiet. You exhale. Ahead lies the courtyard, the kitchens, and the great hall. You think you've made it past the worst of it. Spoiler alert, you haven't. You step into the castle's inner courtyard, grateful, briefly, for the open sky. The sun breaks through the clouds, illuminating the stone walls in warm gold. Birds flutter past. You let yourself breathe, just once, before you notice the next set of architectural nightmares. Arrow slits. They line the towers and walls like narrow, unblinking eyes. Barely wide enough to fit your finger through on the outside, but flared open on the inside for maximum field of fire. You've seen them in movies, quaint, even picturesque. But here now, they feel like the sights of a dozen invisible crossbows pointed straight at your ribcage. You move along the inner wall, eyes flicking from one slit to the next. Are they occupied? Is someone watching? Probably. Maybe even a bored guard with a twitchy finger and a short temper. You can't tell. And that's exactly the point. Arrow slits, also called loopholes, weren't just passive features. They were medieval sniper ports, letting defenders shoot with near-complete protection while offering attackers nothing but frustration. Historians still debate which design offered the best coverage: vertical slits, cruciform, or the keyhole-shaped types used in later fortifications. But all of them share one thing in common. They made sure you couldn't fight back. From your side, they look like tiny cracks in the wall. But from inside, they open up like a gun turret. Archers had enough room to pivot, track, and fire while ducking instantly behind stone. You, meanwhile, are out in the open, probably wearing something flammable. And don't think you're safe if you're inside the castle. Arrow slits were often built into inner walls too, allowing defenders to shoot into their own courtyards if the enemy got that far. You imagine it now, a desperate retreat, chaos in every direction, and the terrifying realization that the arrows are suddenly coming from behind you. There's a strange fringe story floating around about a castle in Wales where a local baron had a personal grudge against a rival and had extra arrow slits carved into his private courtyard, just in case. Historians aren't sure if it's true, but the sheer pettiness of it makes it believable. You keep walking, trying not to flinch when the breeze whistles through one of the higher slits like a breath on the back of your neck. It's not your imagination. These openings hum. The wind echoes in them, creating a constant, low, eerie whisper as if the walls are gossiping about you. And they probably are. Arrow slits also weren't limited to bows. Later on, they were used for crossbows and, eventually, even early firearms. But let's be honest, if someone's aiming anything at you through a slit in the wall, you're already having a bad day. You spot one built at shoulder height and try to peek through. It's darker than you expected, just a narrow shaft of angled stone leading into nothingness. Suddenly you realize someone could be on the other side, watching you, right now, drawing a bead, waiting. You step away quickly, just a little too quickly. You can almost hear a chuckle in the wind. Here's the thing, these slits were never about fairness. They weren't about giving both sides a sporting chance. They were about control, about turning an entire castle into a one sided shooting gallery where only one team had bullets. Or, well, arrows. And if you weren't on that team, your odds were somewhere between bad and already dead. Even the placement of the slits was strategic. Angled downward from high walls, they forced you to approach the castle with your head ducked. That means less visibility, slower progress, and a higher likelihood of falling into a pit, trap, or the ever-charming moat. Basically, your worst hiking trip ever, but with fatal consequences. You press on, hugging the wall instinctively, until you remember that in some castles, the defenders filled the arrow slit zones with boiling oil or hot sand during sieges, turning even stone corridors into pain tunnels. That's right. You're not even safe near the wall. The very place you cling to for cover is a delivery chute for agony. The sun passes behind a cloud. The courtyard suddenly feels colder. You finally reach a door leading into the next part of the castle. It creaks open with a groan, and you step into a dim hallway lined with tapestries that fail to hide the cracks and mold beneath. But even in this temporary shelter, the castle is watching. It sees you. Through slits. Through holes. Through gaps you haven't even noticed yet. It always sees you. The hallway darkens behind you as you step into what you think will be a reprieve. The castle's famed Great Hall. This is the heart of the place, right? The seat of feasts, laughter, politics, intrigue. A room that conjures images of roaring fires, noble lords sipping wine, and minstrels plucking cheerful tunes near a giant boar on a silver platter. You've seen this in movies, you've read it in books. What you didn't expect was the smoke. So much smoke. The fire pit at the center blazes steadily, but there's no chimney in sight. Just a tiny louver, a slatted wooden vent high in the roof that seems wholly inadequate for the job. The smoke rises and swirls, then just sort of hangs there, like a lazy ghost that can't find the exit. Your eyes water, your throat itches, and that noble fantasy starts to melt faster than the wax puddling around a bent iron candelabra. Here's the hard truth. The Great Hall wasn't so great. It was cold, it was smoky, and it was filthy. Stone walls suck in moisture like old bread. The flags and tapestries, they reek of old meat, wet wool, and whatever died in the corner behind the rushes 3 feasts ago. The floor is straw-covered. Yes, straw to absorb spills and waste, which means there's probably something decomposing underfoot. Hope you wore thick boots. You glance at the high table, raised on a dais at one end of the hall. That's where the Lord and his favored guests sit, farther from the smoke, closer to the fire, and conveniently away from the lower tables where servants, soldiers, and peasants cough through their soup. The idea was hierarchy, even in suffering. Historians still argue whether the Great Hall was meant to project power, host community, or simply keep the Lord warm in winter. But what's clear is this: it wasn't meant for comfort. Meals were loud, long, and often unpleasant. Imagine dozens, sometimes hundreds of people crammed into one echoing stone box, eating with their hands, shouting over one another, and letting their dogs roam beneath the benches to catch scraps or lice. Sanitation? Optional. Manners? Optional. Ear. Let's not even talk about the tableware. Knives were personal items. You brought your own. Forks were rare and considered decadent. Which means, yes, the guy next to you is tearing roast goose with the same blade he used to clean his fingernails earlier. Yum. And what about the food? Well, sometimes it was delicious. Other times, it was more like medieval mystery meat. A pottage stew of questionable origin, thick with root vegetables, barley, and whatever animal was unlucky that day. Occasionally, a feather or tooth floated by for flavor. Now for a quirky tidbit. In winter, salt was a status symbol. You were either seated above the salt, near the Lord, or below the salt, with the rabble. It sounds poetic, but it literally just meant your bowl was closer to the expensive white stuff. Salt lines created social lines. You sneeze loudly. The sound ricochets off the stone like a cannon shot. Someone glances at you, a short man with a scar across his nose, gnawing on a bone, and grunts. There's no privacy in here. No personal space. You're seated shoulder to shoulder with strangers, bumping elbows over bowls, inhaling each other's breath, hoping no one coughs blood into your mead. And that fire pit? It's not for you. It's for the lords. The further you sit from the dais, the colder you are. Cold hands, Cold feet, cold everything. The windows, if you can call them that, are narrow slits covered in thin oiled parchment or horn to keep out the wind. But they also keep out the light. This is where politics happen, where secrets are traded, where people smile at you while plotting your exit, through the gate or through the dungeon, or worse, through the garderobe chute. We'll get there soon. Let's not forget, the Great Hall was also your bedroom. Yes, once the feast ended and the benches were cleared, most guests, unless very privileged, just slept there, right on the floor, with rats and strangers, and maybe a damp cloak as your only blanket. At least you're not alone. One traveler wrote of sleeping with a dagger under his tongue, just in case the man next to him got ideas. Another joked that the best way to survive the night was to pretend to be dead, which, honestly, might be more restful. You stand near the center of the room now, blinking through the haze, trying to imagine how anyone found this inspiring. Majestic banners wave slightly in the updraft from the fire. A minstrel plucks a half-hearted tune in the corner, fingers blue with cold. A dog sniffs at your boot, then decides you're not food. Yet. Welcome to the Great Hall. Breathe deeply, if your lungs can take it. You've had enough of the Great Hall's smoky charm, so you duck into a narrow corridor, hoping for fresh air. Instead, you get something else entirely. A scent. A potent one. Sharp, earthy, unmistakably human. The corridor slopes slightly downward, and a chill creeps in. A few flickering torches cast long, dancing shadows. And then suddenly, there it is. A wooden door, half open, revealing a small alcove jutting off the wall of the castle. Congratulations. You've found the latrine, also known as a garderobe, which is medieval code for hole in the wall that leads to who knows where. And tonight, lucky you, you're invited to take the scenic route. You step closer. The air is thick. It's not just unpleasant, it's aggressive. Like the smell is trying to pick a fight. You peek inside, and there it is, a stone bench with a neat little round opening. Underneath, a void, a dark shaft dropping into the unknown. The sound of distant trickling is somehow more disturbing than total silence. You sit very carefully and notice there's no door, no privacy, just a little curtain if you're lucky. And if you're unlucky, a strong draft that leaves your rear end with frostbite and your dignity somewhere in the moat. Historians still argue whether garderobes were ingenious or insane. On one hand, they kept the mess away from living quarters. On the other, they funneled said mess directly down the side of the wall, or worse, into that lovely moat you saw earlier. Which means the outside of the castle, that impressive stone facade, it's literally streaked with centuries of, you get the idea. A quirky tidbit for your nightmares. Some garderobes emptied into pits, others into streams, and a few had no clear end at all. In one English castle, archaeologists discovered an entire nest of rats, bones and all, preserved in an ancient waste chute. Apparently, not all visitors climbed the stairs. But here's the fun part. Garderobes weren't just functional, they were tactical. Some were designed into the outside of the wall, projecting over ditches, which meant that in a siege, attackers trying to scale the castle might find themselves climbing directly beneath a very active latrine. Imagine storming a wall and getting a chamber pot's worth of surprise from above. You'd rethink your loyalty real fast. And the name? Garderobe comes from the French for guarding the robe. Because, believe it or not, people used to hang their clothes in or near these latrines. Why? Because the ammonia-rich fumes supposedly killed lice. That's right. Your best tunic was stored in a room filled with fermenting human waste because it helped with the bugs. You stand up, gently, and try not to think about how many people have perched here before you. No flushing, no hand washing, just you, your questionable choices, and whatever's lurking in the shadows of the pit. And don't get too confident. Latrines were often located along outer walls, sometimes on upper floors. No railings, no seatbelts, just a stone hole over a 20-foot drop. You slip? That's not a metaphor. That's the last sentence in your autobiography. There's a grim legend told in hushed tones about a noble who fell into his own latrine and drowned before anyone could pull him out. Whether that's true or not, it happened enough times for it to become part of castle lore. And let's not forget, during wartime, latrines were prime sabotage targets. Enemy spies were rumored to climb up the chute like the world's worst chimney sweep, sneaking into the castle through the least dignified route imaginable. That's not just infiltration, that's commitment. You step out of the garderobe alcove and back into the corridor, breathing shallowly, trying not to gag. A guard passes you, gives you a knowing smirk, and tosses a bucket of ash into the chute. That's the cleaning system. Ash. Not soap, not water, just ash. Some castles had multiple garderobes per floor, others had only one. In the latter case, hundreds of people shared the same small stinking opening. During a siege, no access, no disposal, just backup. You don't want to know what backup meant. You continue down the corridor, and a gust of wind pushes through the stonework, whistling past the garderobe hole like a ghost with gastrointestinal issues. The entire building feels alive again, rumbling softly with centuries of digestion. The castle may be magnificent from the outside, but inside, it's part latrine, part labyrinth, part lunatic asylum. And you haven't even seen the kitchen yet. After the fragrant misadventure of the garderobe, you're craving something, anything, more pleasant. Maybe food. Yes, food. Surely the medieval kitchen has something warm and wholesome waiting. You follow the smell of smoke and roasting meat through a side passage, the air growing hotter, thicker with grease. Finally, you step into a cavernous, soot-stained chamber roaring with fire and noise. Welcome to the castle kitchen, a medieval miracle of chaos, knives, and a very real chance of spontaneous combustion. Your eyes sting from the smoke immediately. There are no extractor fans here, no tiled walls, no stainless steel prep tables, just a central hearth, embers glowing like dragon eyes, and rows of cooks in layered wool tunics moving with the precision of sleep-deprived circus performers wielding cleavers. You dodge a swinging spit. A ladle flies past your head. Someone barks at someone else about the venison. And everywhere, there's the sound of boiling, sizzling, coughing, cursing, chopping. This is not Gordon Ramsay. This is Grim Ramsay. The temperature is brutal. The only ventilation comes from small vents high up in the walls, barely enough to keep the room from asphyxiating. Most of the heat never escapes, clinging instead to the stone, the iron, and your skin. Historians still debate whether castle kitchens were ever efficient, but most agree they were dangerous. Open flames, hot oils, wooden beams, and no fire extinguishers? That's not a kitchen. That's a medieval fireworks factory disguised as dinner service. You pass a table where a boy is plucking feathers from a goose. He sneezes into his sleeve, then goes back to work. Hygiene isn't so much encouraged here as it is theoretical. And the food? Well, that depends on your status. For nobles, it's a spectacle. Roasted swan, gilded pies, layered pastries filled with figs, almonds, and sometimes, if you're really lucky, actual meat. Everything spiced within an inch of its life to show off the Lord's wealth. Cinnamon, cloves, saffron, all imported and extravagantly expensive. The kind of things we sprinkle lightly on oatmeal today were once worth their weight in silver. But you're no lord. You're lucky if you get the pot at the edge of the hearth. Some grayish stew full of root vegetables and mystery lumps. You think it's lamb. You hope it's lamb. It might be lamb. A quirky note, medieval cooks were incredibly inventive, not because of taste, but necessity. Spoiled meat? No problem. Drown it in vinegar and spices. Bread gone moldy, toast it over the fire and scrape the green bits. Cheese a little runny? Congrats, you've invented a sauce. And they didn't waste anything. Every part of the animal was used. Liver, brain, feet, stomach, all fair game. One popular dish? Black pudding. It's a sausage made with blood. And no, the blood wasn't just flavoring. It was the main event. Meanwhile, the kitchen's other purpose, besides feeding people, was fueling the entire castle's fire system. One roaring hearth might also supply heat to the bathhouse if there was one, or to warming rooms. So when the kitchen burned down, and it often did, it took a lot of the castle with it. In fact, there's a well-documented case at a French chateau where the kitchen's chimney caught fire, ignited the ceiling beams, and caused an entire wing to collapse during a banquet. Some guests fled. Some didn't. The pie survived. Barely. You step around a cauldron the size of a wine barrel and peer inside. Something red bubbles within. Berries? Beets? Blood? A cook slaps your hand away with a spoon. Not for you, he says, grinning with the casual menace of someone who's seen a lot of fingers end up in the stew by accident. One of the spit boys coughs violently near the meat rack. No one reacts. He keeps turning the handle. You realize then that everyone here is sick. Smoke sick, food sick, life sick. They keep working because there's no choice. The kitchen doesn't stop. Not during war, not during famine, not during plague, especially not during plague. And yes, during outbreaks, kitchens were prime transmission points. Food touched by too many hands, coughs over open pots, rats nesting near the grain stores. At one point, castle lords took to testing food on servants, or even dogs before dining themselves. You? You just cross your fingers and hope that goose isn't filled with regret. Eventually, you stumble out through a side door, gasping for air like someone who's just survived a grease fire in a basement. Behind you, the door swings shut with a slam. Inside, the kitchen roars on, a hungry, smoky, feverish machine. You wipe your face, which now smells permanently like onions and charcoal, and take a deep breath of cold castle air. One step closer to understanding why living in a medieval castle was less a privilege and more a form of slow-motion self-endangerment. You stagger down a breezeway, still coughing out kitchen soot, and the cold air slaps your lungs like a bucket of icy water. You think you'll get a break, but the next chamber looms, dim, cold, and echoing. Stone stairs lead downward, because of course they do. You descend again, this time into the storage levels of the castle. The cellars, the underbelly, the place where things are kept, grain, barrels of mead, salted meat, dried fish, old weapons, maybe a skeleton or two, intentional or not. Your boots crunch on spilled barley. The smell is sour and stale. This part of the castle is quiet, too quiet. And that's when you realize something unsettling. These vaults weren't just for storing food. They were also built to keep people in. A short hallway leads to a narrow door, and behind that, a tiny stone room with a bolted iron ring on the floor. The dungeon. Yes, the real thing, not the Hollywood lava pit with goblins version. This is a windowless, airless, bone-cold space designed with two goals: isolation and discomfort. Let's set the record straight. Not all castles had dungeons. Historians still debate whether the word itself became retroactively dramatic. But some castles, especially larger royal or noble ones, absolutely had cells, oubliettes, and holding pits, and none of them were made with ergonomic principles in mind. You step inside, instantly swallowing your breath. The air is thick, damp, and metallic. One torch flickers against the stone, chains clink in the dark, and then your foot lands on something soft. It's straw, old, moldy straw. You freeze, because this straw isn't bedding, it's insulation. Insulation against suffering. It doesn't do a very good job. An oubliette is the worst version of a dungeon. The word comes from the French oublier, to forget, because that's exactly what happened to the people dropped in. These weren't your polite wait here for trial cells. These were vertical shafts, often with no door, just a hole in the ceiling. You were lowered or dropped in. No stairs, no ladder, just walls, slick stone, and darkness. There's a famous debate among scholars over how often oubliettes were used. Some say they were rare, theatrical exceptions. Others insist they were terrifyingly common. What's not in dispute is that anyone placed in one had exactly two ways out: die or scream until someone remembered you existed. You run your fingers along the stone wall. It's rough, cold. Not just cold, soaking cold. Groundwater seeps through, dripping along the edges. And if it's winter, that water freezes. You don't just sit in prison. You sit in frostbite. No windows, no latrine, just a chamber pot if you're lucky. You begin to notice a smell, not sharp like the garderobe. This is a deeper smell: human decay, sweat, fear, and the acoustics are deceptive. You speak, and your voice doesn't echo. It just dies. The stone eats sound. So even if you scream, no one above might hear. Or worse, they do hear, and don't care. Let's sprinkle in a quirky fringe theory. Some believe certain castles had interrogation rooms disguised as wine cellars. That is, you could press someone for information with a wine rack in the background. Dignified, if not hygienic. But you're not thinking about wine now. You're thinking about how easy it would be to disappear in a place like this, and how no one would ever find you. Because the castle has its secrets, and not all of them walk on two legs. There are stories, always whispered, never confirmed, about prisoners who died in the walls, buried behind bricked-over alcoves, hidden in forgotten crawlspaces. Even noble families sometimes had a problematic relative conveniently vanish. No trial, no record, just silence. And if you think the guards were any more trustworthy, think again. A guard could be bribed, drunk, or simply lazy. Many prisoners simply rotted, not executed, not released, just left. You glance down the corridor and see more iron doors. One is bolted from the outside, another hangs open, dark as ink. You don't want to go in. But the castle does, because this part of the fortress doesn't just trap people, it feeds on isolation. The walls here have memories, scratches, stains, whispers etched in the mortar. And all of them say the same thing: don't get caught. You hurry back up the stairs, grateful for every breath of outside air, every shaft of light. Because for all the castle's grandeur, this place was built to hold power. And power, in the Middle Ages, meant the ability to trap, starve, and silence anyone, noble, knight, or peasant, with cold stone and colder intention. The dungeon door swings shut behind you, and the walls go quiet once more. You return to the upper levels with stiff legs and a chill that won't quite shake off. The sunlight doesn't warm you anymore. The dungeon has left its mark, cold in your bones, a tension behind your eyes. But the castle isn't finished with you yet, because now you're climbing again. Up another spiral staircase, this one narrower than the last. Your shoulders brush damp stone, and your breath fogs in the narrowing space. It feels less like you're ascending, and more like the tower is swallowing you. At last, you emerge into a chamber with wide views and even wider vulnerabilities. Welcome to the tower bedroom, the lofty roost of lords, ladies, and unfortunate guests. It should be peaceful. The view stretches for miles. Forests, hills, and winding roads below. You can even see the outer wall from here, tiny guards pacing like beetles in the sun. You're above it all. But then you notice the wind. It whistles through cracks in the window shutters, squeezes between the ceiling beams, and rattles the iron rings on the wall. It is relentless. There's no insulation, no glass, just wooden slats over slits, or if you're lucky, horn panes that fog and warp in bad weather. This room is a refrigerator with a feather bed. And speaking of the bed, it's huge. 4 posts, thick canopy, fur blankets heaped high. Looks warm, right? You lift the top layer and find the mattress is stuffed with straw, matted down and likely full of lice. 1 or 2 things scurry. Even the pillows feel damp. Everything in the castle sweats moisture, even your dreams. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. Castles were built for defense, not comfort. The upper chambers were kept high to offer safety and visibility, but they were also cold, drafty, and hard to reach in emergencies. The higher you slept, the safer you were from invaders. But the more likely you'd break a leg trying to reach the garderobe in the dark. And yes, no indoor plumbing. No cozy ensuite bathroom. You climb down a hallway with a candle if you're lucky, just to reach the freezing perch of a toilet that might collapse under your weight. You sit on the bed, trying not to think about the dampness. The room is sparsely furnished. Chests, a writing table, a wooden rack for armor. The fireplace is small, nearly useless, and the smoke has no good way to escape. Your eyes sting. Again, a fringe detail. Some castles built night stairs between the chapel and the bedroom, so lords could creep to morning prayers without passing through the cold main halls. Great in theory. But at least one noble slipped on icy stone and broke his neck. The stairs were later removed. Divine intervention or poor design? Historians still argue. You look up and see a beam overhead with a large iron hook in it. Before you panic, it's not for that. Hooks like these were used to hang lamps or sometimes to hoist heavy bundles. But in this room, it's more likely a meat hook disguised as a coat hanger. It says something that even bedrooms had multi-use survival features. You check the walls. They're thick enough to muffle sound. Some were even designed with murder holes. Yes, even this high up. That means, should someone invade the tower, boiling oil or rocks could be dropped through gaps in the floor onto anyone climbing the stairs. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep in a room designed as a trapdoor weapon. You open the wooden shutter to let in some light, and the wind nearly takes your hand off. The view is beautiful, though. Stunning, even. But it's not for pleasure. It's for surveillance. Every vista, every tree line, every trail in the snow, it's all part of a defensive strategy. You're not here to relax. You're here to see them coming. And while you're staring out, it hits you. This wasn't a retreat for weary nobles. It was a glorified panic room with tapestries. During a siege, everyone important retreated to the highest rooms. And then they waited, hungry, cold, breathing the same air, until the enemy gave up or got in. You glance at the trapdoor in the ceiling, another level above. The solar, perhaps, a small private room for reading or prayer. but the ladder leading to it looks questionable at best. You're not climbing it. Because here, you've learned something vital. Height doesn't equal safety. Not when the floors might collapse, the winds might howl you to sleep, and the guards might forget to bring your dinner because they're too busy manning the walls. So you step back, close the shutter, and sit once more on the edge of the damp bed. The castle gives no comfort, not even here. You descend again, this time into one of the strangest and most quietly threatening parts of the castle, the walls themselves. Not the pretty parapets with flags fluttering above a scenic countryside, but the claustrophobic, creaking, defensively obsessive corridors tucked within the very skeleton of the structure. These are the wall walks and passageways, and you're not strolling here for fun, you're patrolling. The stone under your boots is uneven, worn by centuries of marching feet. The ceiling presses low. The walls are thick, sometimes more than 10 feet. And inside these walls, hollow channels, hidden staircases, and cramped shooting galleries designed to trap you with your enemies or between them. You pass an archer's station, just a slab of wood wedged under a slit in the stone, no cushion, no room to turn. A bow leans against the wall beside it. You imagine crouching here, silent for hours, watching for the flicker of movement beyond the battlements. Your fingers numb, your knees locked, your back screaming. And the moment you stand to stretch, that's when the arrow hits. It's not a paranoid fantasy, it's the job. These internal corridors, called chemin de ronde in France, were meant for mobility. Guards moved quickly between towers, stairs, and defensive positions without exposing themselves to outside attack. But they came with a price. No light, no warmth, no escape. One quirky fact, some castles built false walls within their real ones, decoys, traps, or hiding places for surprise attacks. So not only are you lost in a maze of damp, identical corridors, you're also wondering if the wall beside you is real. Or hollow, or already occupied. The air here is stale, not quite foul, but dead, like it hasn't moved in centuries. And then comes the twist. The walls didn't just hold defenders. Sometimes they were prisons. Small cavities cut into the masonry, barely big enough to sit. No door, just a hatch. You might be placed there as punishment or to hide during a siege. Either way, it's the sort of tight space that teaches you things about your own heartbeat. Historians still debate whether these nooks were designed for function or fear. Were they built to house supplies or scare people into obedience? Either way, you start noticing them everywhere now. A tiny wooden hatch, a vent in the floor, a cutout in the wall you definitely didn't see on the blueprints. You reach the curtain wall, the outermost shield between the castle and the world. From here, you can see the fields, the forests, and, if this were wartime, the marching lines of your enemies. You imagine the tension, the silence before the horn, the seconds before fire rains down. Defending a castle sounds brave until you realize it means standing still while the enemy throws everything they have at the stones around you. And sometimes, the stones don't win. You move along the parapet now, wind slapping your cloak. The crenellations, those iconic up and down gaps, look romantic in paintings. But here in person, they're just another harsh reality. You duck behind a merlin, the up part, for cover, then peek out through an embrasure, the down part. It's not elegant, it's not cozy, it's just war geometry. And in case you're feeling safe, look down. Right below your feet might be a mechiculation, a stone opening between corbels that lets you drop rocks, boiling water, or flaming pitch onto attackers directly below. Useful? Absolutely. Secure? Not even close. One misstep and you're the falling object. And the guards? They don't get glory. They get windburn, boredom, and the constant ache of being on edge. The guy next to you might have trench foot. The one on your left might fall asleep and fall off. There's a reason castles lost battles. It wasn't always the wall that broke. Sometimes it was just people. You duck back into the corridor where a spiral stair leads down to the inner yard. The wall seems to sigh behind you. It knows you're not ready for what comes next, because you haven't been to the chapel yet. You step away from the courtyard's controlled chaos and find yourself beneath a battered stone arch leading into the armory. The change in atmosphere is immediate. It's quieter here, but not peaceful. This is the room that anticipates violence. The air is thick with iron and oiled leather. Every surface gleams dully, like it's been handled, sharpened, or stained 100 times. You pass racks of swords, spears, halberds, and crossbows arranged in tight, disciplined lines, each one a tool of precision, pain, or panic. In a castle, this is where the real authority lives, not in the throne room, but here, in cold steel. You pick up a sword, heavier than you expect. It's not balanced for flair, but function. Designed to go through chainmail or a rib cage. The handle is wrapped in worn hide, darkened with sweat and likely older blood. A suit of armor stands nearby, propped like a man forever on the verge of battle. It's missing its gauntlets. The visor is cracked, but even in its current state, it radiates menace. Here's your historical fact. Suits of armor weren't one size fits all. They were custom made for the wealthy, pieced together for the rest. A knight's full harness could weigh up to 60 pounds, but it was distributed weight, allowing flexibility and surprising mobility. Still, once you're inside it, you're committed. No quick bathroom breaks, no easy breathing. And if you fall, good luck getting back up without a squire and a prayer. You glance at the archery wall, bows strung tight, arrows in bundles, fletched with goose feathers, barbed or broad-tipped depending on whether you're hunting deer or invaders. Each arrowhead tells a story. Some are hand-hammered, others mass-cast in forges that ran day and night. Then you see a pile of shields near the wall, chipped and smoke-stained. Many bear faded coats of arms, old alliances, failed houses, forgotten warriors. They're not decoration. They're leftovers from people who didn't make it through the last siege. And now we reach the truly medieval part, boiling oil and projectiles. There's a row of earthen pots lined against the wall. You lift one. It's filled with something sticky. Not oil exactly, more like tar. These were dropped from machicolations, the gaps in the battlements, onto attackers below. Sometimes the contents were flaming pitch. Other times, just rotting refuse. Or animal fat. Or, in one recorded siege, hornets. Yes, a besieged castle once threw hornet nests at attackers. Historians still debate whether it worked. We're guessing yes. A fringe detail, one castle kept barrels of sand to pour over siege ladders. Sounds silly until you realize how hard it is to climb a ladder when your eyes are full of burning grit and your hands are slick with panic. Beside the sand barrels, a rack of war hammers and morning stars. Brutal things. Less knightly, more blunt force dentistry. They weren't designed to slash. They were built to crush. Armor didn't always stop the trauma. It just kept the bleeding on the inside. You spot a staircase leading up to the guardhouse, where the day's weapons are distributed. The guard on duty yawns and rubs his temple, not from boredom, but fatigue. These men are always tired. Because even in peacetime, the drills never stop. And the armory isn't only a place to take weapons, it's where you return them. Bloodied, dented, or snapped in half, and someone has to repair them. The castle's armorer is a magician of rivets and grindstones. His workbench looks like a war shrine. Half-finished helms, torn leather, twisted chain links laid out like offerings. You notice the chainmail hanging from a peg. You lift it. It weighs as much as a toddler. Every ring is hand-linked, tens of thousands of them. A single break could mean a blade sliding right through. There's no such thing as invincible in a castle, just slightly less dead. Even the tools of war are war-torn. You find a forgotten corner near a pile of broken shields. You sit just for a moment, and you realize something. This castle isn't just a fortress. It's a nervous system of fear. Every hallway leads to a dead end or a defense. Every room has a double purpose. Comfort is never the primary goal. Survival is, and even that isn't guaranteed, because the very walls that protect you are also a trap. The stairs you climb are choke points. The rooms you sleep in are fire hazards. The towers are wind tunnels. And the weapons? They're everywhere. You exhale, slow and heavy. This castle was never meant to be lived in peacefully. It was meant to hold, control, outlast. For a day, a month, maybe longer. But no one walks away unchanged. Wind down begins. You lean back against the cool stone wall of the armory, the sounds of the castle now distant, softened by time and quiet. Your breathing slows. You feel the weight of the place settle into stillness around you. Outside, the torches dim. The castle breathes its heavy, ancient breath. No more clangs of metal, no shouting guards, no creaking gates or flapping standards. Just the rustle of straw in an empty stable, the fading echo of boots over stone, a shutter closing gently in the wind. You imagine the castle at night, not under siege, not bracing for war, just existing, holding its centuries inside like a secret, a hushed monument to what it cost to survive. The fires are low, the guards are switching shifts, the kitchens are dark, only the chapel candle still flickers, soft, small, steady. You close your eyes and let the last embers of the day burn low. You're safe for now, safe within these flawed, freezing, fascinating walls. Let the castle fade behind you. Let the cold become quiet. Let the night hold you gently. Sweet dreams. You emerge from the shadowy wall, walk into a surprisingly quiet space. Quiet in a way that makes you pause. No clang of armor, no barking orders, just muffled echoes and the faint scent of wax and damp wool. You've entered the castle chapel. It's small, far smaller than you expected. Certainly not cathedral-like, but it's tall, narrow, and cool, like a stone throat opening to the heavens. A single stained glass window filters pale, colored light across the stone floor. You can almost hear it hum. This is where the castle prays, and where it worries. Because here, salvation and superstition are in constant negotiation. The pews, if there are any, are hard and uneven. More likely, it's standing room only. Nobles might have cushioned benches along the side, but everyone else just stands shoulder to shoulder, knees aching, trying not to nod off during the Latin. The altar is simple. A carved stone slab with a cloth, a wooden crucifix, and, if the castle is rich, perhaps a gilded chalice or two. But most of the decoration is in the walls themselves. Niches, worn icons, and painted saints so faded you're not sure if that's St. George or a water stain with good posture. And this is important. The chapel isn't just a place of worship, it's politics. Lords hold power here by divine right. Oaths are sworn before God and enforced with steel. That's not just a ceremony, that's the legal contract system of the medieval world. A quirky fringe tidbit? Some castles had double-decker chapels, 2 levels, one for nobles, one for commoners. The nobility sat above, closer to God, while the poor listened from below. Historians still debate whether this was theological symbolism or just plain snobbery. Probably both. You step to the side and notice the priest's quarters, a cramped little cell adjacent to the chapel. A cot, a stool, a pile of vellum. He's not here now, but his presence lingers in the smell of ink and candle wax. This man isn't just a spiritual guide, he's also a scribe, an advisor, and sometimes a spy. Because confession, that's where secrets live. It's no accident that many lords kept their chaplains close. The chapel was often where wills were made, alliances sworn, and sins weighed against the balance of power. If the dungeon is the heart of fear, the chapel is the mind of control. And don't forget, in a castle under siege, the chapel doubles as a last refuge. If the keep falls, you retreat here, not for safety, but for final prayers. More than one noble has died at this very altar, sword in hand, asking for mercy from both sides. You sit in a side alcove under a cold arch and glance at the stained glass. The colors are deep but subdued, more smoke than fire. Red for blood, blue for heaven, green for sickness, or maybe hope, depending on the year. These windows are made of thick, bubbled glass, leaded together and barely transparent. They're less about light and more about mood. Here's a lesser-known detail. Castles sometimes repurposed old pagan symbols into chapel decor. Carved beasts tucked into arches, green men hiding in the woodwork. The church, especially in the early medieval period, knew better than to erase all the old gods. Better to bury them in stone. The wind rattles the door behind you. A bell tolls in the tower. 3 dull chimes echoed by another in the yard. It's the hour of remembrance. You look up and realize the ceiling is painted badly. Faded stars, a cracked sun, and the flaking face of Christ, who seems to be looking just slightly away from you, as though he also knows you've stepped into a place where faith is deeply intertwined with fear. Because even here, even in this quiet sanctuary, you remember, this is a castle, and castles are never built just to inspire, they're built to control. Religion in this age is not comfort, it's order. It tells you where you stand, who you serve, and what happens if you disobey. And when things go wrong, that's not a coincidence. That's divine punishment. Fire, famine, betrayal, it all goes back to sin. Or at least, that's what the priest says. You rise, joints cracking, and make your way down the narrow aisle. The floor creaks, stones somehow groaning beneath you. You brush against a pillar carved with vines, faded Latin threading its way around the curve. Vita brevis, bellum aeternum. Life is short. War is eternal. You believe it. The chapel doors open with a sigh, and once again, the castle breathes you back into its cold, waiting halls. You emerge from the chapel subdued, quieter, but the castle doesn't let up. If anything, it's turning the screws. Because now you're in the courtyard, that open air heart of the fortress where life pulses without ever truly relaxing. The first thing you notice? It's not open. Not really. The walls loom so high around you, it feels like the sky is boxed in. The air smells of wet stone, mud, and horses, thick, earthy, metallic. A dozen sounds compete for your attention. Blacksmith's hammers ringing on iron, chickens squawking, dogs barking, boots slapping puddles. A rooster somewhere is very confident about his job. This is no tranquil plaza. This is the machine room of the castle. You pass carts loaded with hay, bundles of firewood, and a group of servants hauling water from a cistern that smells like wet pennies. To one side, squires run practice drills with blunted swords. On the other, two cooks argue over a collapsed barrel of turnips. No one's idle. No one can be. Because in the castle courtyard, there's always work to do. Always someone to feed, fix, mend, fetch, clean, or bury. The blacksmith's forge is the loudest corner. Sparks dance in the air as he works the bellows, heating metal until it screams. His apprentice sweats through his tunic, pounding red-hot horseshoes with the enthusiasm of someone trying to banish every thought from his head. You glance at the nearby stables, a jumble of noise, mud, and very large animals. Horses whinny and stomp, flies hover, the hay smells more like ammonia than grass. Even the saddle racks seem exhausted. And here's your historical fact. A castle courtyard had to be self-sufficient. In times of siege, it was the entire world, barracks, market, factory, hospital, even morgue. People lived here, worked here, trained here, for months at a time if needed. You walk past a row of barrels. Some are for water, others for wine. One smells suspiciously like pickled fish. Another is labeled with a crude symbol that probably means don't open unless you want to cry. A fringe tidbit for you. During sieges, castles often had to turn their courtyards into composting fields, or emergency gardens, growing onions, leeks, and fast crops in every spare inch. Some even kept rabbits in cages for a mobile protein source. Castle bunnies, cute and doomed. But now your eye catches something odd, a set of vertical holes in the outer wall, near the base. Too small for windows, too evenly spaced. You bend down. They reek of mold, but more than that, people. Because that's where the servants live, or rather, where they try to sleep. Beneath the castle, under the courtyard, in storage alcoves and converted wine cellars. These aren't rooms, they're holes. Cold, damp, and shared with every rodent north of the Danube. Historians still argue whether these living conditions were the result of design limitations or intentional hierarchy. But one thing's certain, the castle isn't equal, not even close. You watch as a page runs across the yard, slips in the mud, gets up again without complaint. He's maybe 12. He carries a tray with pewter dishes stacked high, probably heading to a noble's table somewhere up the tower. Behind you, two guards are repairing a broken pulley. One curses. The other shrugs and starts tying a rope with his teeth. No one stops to help. Everyone's too busy staying useful. Because in this world, being idle is the same as being invisible or expendable. You step carefully around a small fire pit, now just ash and bone fragments. Last night's dinner, or last week's horse. You're not asking. And over by the gatehouse, a gibbet, an iron cage hanging from a pole, now empty, swinging slightly in the breeze. But you know what it's for. Not crows. Messages. Here's another dark truth. The castle courtyard was also for spectacle, executions, punishments, public humiliations. Not because they were common, but because they were useful. Fear is cheaper than a wall, and when there wasn't violence, there was ceremony, knighthood rituals, feasts, oaths of loyalty. They all happened here, under the eye of every peasant, every rival, every child. The ground is packed dirt, no flagstones. It's been stamped by centuries of anxious feet. You find a quieter corner now, near the well. The rope creaks as a bucket descends. A woman beside you murmurs a prayer under her breath as she draws water. For drinking, for cooking, for the dead, all three, probably. You look around, and for a brief moment, you see it. The entire castle, moving like a nervous, breathing creature, chained together by duty, ritual, hunger, and walls. And the courtyard is its exposed ribcage.